It is 1837, and the American economy has collapsed. Years of reckless land speculation and fragile banking systems have finally given way, triggering one of the most devastating financial crises the young nation has ever seen. Across the country, banks shutter their doors, credit evaporates, and thousands of families are forced out of their homes almost overnight. In New York City, eviction notices pile up as jobs disappear and entire neighborhoods slide into desperation. Yet in the middle of this chaos, one man appears entirely unmoved. While his neighbors are losing everything, he calmly writes checks worth the modern equivalent of millions of dollars, buying up entire blocks of Manhattan as prices implode. This man is John Jacob Astor, and while the country suffers, he quietly lays the foundation for one of the most powerful real estate empires in American history. Astor's confidence during the Panic of 1837 was no accident. By that point, he had already built and survived multiple fortunes, often in industries far darker than real estate. He had once controlled nearly 90% of the American fur trade, creating what many historians consider the first true monopoly in U.S. history. He had shipped vast quantities of opium to China despite its illegality, fueling addiction abroad and profit at home. He had openly advertised opium sales in New York newspapers, selling to the very city that would later make his heirs unimaginably wealthy. He had lobbied Congress to outlaw his foreign competitors, weaponizing American law to eliminate rivals. And most importantly, he had locked vast swaths of Manhattan land into a family trust, ensuring that long after his death, his descendants would remain the landlords of New York. The Astor family would eventually build iconic landmarks like the Waldorf Astoria Hotel and control more of Manhattan than any dynasty before or since. For more than a century, their name would be synonymous with wealth, land, and influence. Yet the origin of this empire is almost unbelievable. John Jacob Astor was not born into privilege. He was the son of a butcher from a small village in what is now Germany, a young man with no inheritance, no connections, and no guarantee that he would survive abroad, let alone dominate an entire city. Astor was born Johann Jacob Astor in 1763 in the village of Waldorf. His childhood was simple and constrained by class. His family worked hard, but opportunity was limited, and Astor knew early that he did not want the same life as his forefathers. At just 16 years old, he left home and traveled to London, where his older brother worked with an uncle making musical instruments. Astor joined them, learning the trade and getting his first taste of life beyond rural Europe. It was not glamorous work, but it exposed him to commerce, negotiation, and the wider world. After a few years in London, history opened a door. The American Revolutionary War ended in 1783, and transatlantic travel resumed. Astor wasted no time. With a handful of flutes to sell and roughly $25 to his name, he boarded a ship bound for America. He did not speak fluent English. He had no safety net. But during the voyage, he learned about the North American fur trade, a business driven by European fashion and fueled by the continent's vast wilderness. That single conversation would change the course of his life. By the late 1780s, Astor had opened a small fur shop in New York City. Demand was soaring, especially for beaver pelts used in fashionable hats, and competition was still fragmented. Astor moved aggressively. He built relationships with traders, financed expeditions, and reinvested profits without hesitation. In 1808, he formalized his dominance by founding the American Fur Company. Over the next decade, it expanded across the Great Lakes and deep into the American interior, turning St. Louis into a major hub and working closely with Native American tribes who understood the land far better than any outsider. Astor's success, however, was not built on trade alone. He understood power. He cultivated politicians, leveraged favors, and systematically squeezed competitors out of the market. His ambitions stretched all the way to the Pacific. In 1811, His company established a trading post at the mouth of the Columbia River called Fort Astoria, a strategic gateway between inland fur routes and Pacific shipping lanes. But that dream collapsed almost immediately when the War of 1812 broke out. Fearing a British attack, Astor's men sold the post to a Canadian company for a fraction of its value. The British would hold the territory for decades, and Astor's Western vision seemed ruined. Most men would have accepted the loss. Astor did not. Instead, he turned to Congress. Through relentless lobbying, he pushed for laws that barred foreign traders from operating on American soil. In 1816, Congress passed legislation prohibiting non-citizens from owning fur businesses in U.S. territory. The very company that had taken Fort Astoria was forced to abandon its American network, which Astor promptly absorbed. Further rulings followed, eliminating foreign government trading posts altogether. By the early 1820s, Astor stood alone at the top, commanding nearly the entire American fur market, a monopoly secured not just by commerce, but by law. Yet fur was not enough. Astor always followed the highest margins, and soon his attention shifted to something far more destructive: opium. China had banned the drug, but enforcement was weak, and international smugglers thrived through bribery and offshore exchanges. While British traders dominated the Indian opium supply, Astor found an opening elsewhere. In 1816, he imported large quantities of Turkish opium, lower quality, but still highly profitable. It was shipped to China, exchanged for valuable goods, and resold in Western markets. The exact scale of his involvement remains debated, but conservative estimates place it in the hundreds of thousands of pounds. Astor even sold opium in New York itself, advertising openly and without shame. Profit outweighed consequence. The trade helped fuel a devastating addiction crisis in China, one that would eventually provoke harsher crackdowns and international conflict. By 1821, Chinese enforcement tightened, and Astor withdrew, not out of remorse, but calculation. The risk had grown, and he was ready to move on. At the same time, the fur trade was weakening. Fashion trends shifted towards silk hats, beaver populations declined, and trappers pushed deeper into hostile territory for diminishing returns. Costs rose, profits thinned, and criticism of the industry's treatment of native communities intensified. Astor read the moment perfectly. Flush with cash from fur and opium, he pivoted entirely into real estate. He believed New York would become a global city, and he positioned himself accordingly. When the Panic of 1837 struck and land values collapsed, Astor did not hesitate. While others panicked, he bought relentlessly, acquiring Manhattan property for what would amount to roughly $7.5 million today, an enormous sum at the time. Crucially, he bought during the crash, not after it, securing vast tracts at rock-bottom prices.